Welcome to From Rome Info video. My name is Brother Alexis Bugnello, and I'm the publisher and editor of FromRome.info, an electronic journal for news and commentary about Rome, Italy, the Catholic Church, and the Vatican. In today's program, I'm going to explain how the Freemasons entrap the minds of modern men, even in the church, through an error you probably never heard of. So this is a video on juridical positivism and how, if you accept it, you become the slave of globalists, with a particular reference to the election of the Roman Pontiff. So this is mostly for the readers of From Rome or anyone interested in knowing more about the Save Rome project. So when we talk about rights, in Western civilization, we almost invariably are going to discuss the legal traditions that go back to Rome. The Latin word for right, jus, ius, is where we get our word justice, and juridical. And we still spell it in a similar way in English, thanks to Webster's, at least in the United States, that is. And when we talk about right, there are several different concepts. There is what you have a right to do, what you have the right not to suffer. We can talk about law, because the Latin word juris, also has to do with law. The study of rights or of law is called jurisprudence in the English language, although jurisprudence is more the theory of right. And in this context, there are two views of rights. There is the view that has existed from the dawns of time, and there's a new concept that comes about in the 19th century. It's called juridical positivism. So in the classical system of right, your rights are founded on reality. It's because of something out there in the real world, or what you are according to your nature, that you have rights. But in juridical positivism, you only have rights if some human being wrote a law and said you had rights. You can see already the problem with juridical positivism. If juridical positivism, which is the now dominant thought in all Western legal systems, is respected, then whether something is allowed or not in law, whether you have rights or not in law, depends on the whim of some political power that is recognized to have the authority to legislate laws. Legislate means to promulgate law. And the old notion, though, is that rights come from something greater than the ability of man to write and speak. And in the Christian tradition, this is emphasized on Mount Sinai, when Moses goes up to worship the living God, and God gives the Hebrew people 10 commandments by which they are to live their lives, moral commandments. And Moses does not write them on the 10 tablets. The hand of the living God writes them. Now, this becomes even more important in Christianity, where we believe God became man and had a hand. But it's God's way of saying that, no, you don't make the rules. I make the rules because I am the creator. And even non-Christians, non-believers, non-Hebrews recognize that if you've ever read the Ten Commandments, there's something, they hold man to a standard. They define the dignity and nobility of humanity. Because if human beings don't have to live according to law, then we can become even more depraved by animals. Now, in the classic ideas of right and law that existed before juridical positivism, we speak of things like natural law. Why do dogs do what dogs do and cows do what they do? We say there's a natural law. They're inherent in their very nature. That's their nature of doing things like that. You don't find cows acting like dogs or dogs acting like cows. Because there is a law written in their very nature. Bonaventure will say it's written in the book of nature, but not with human words. So when we come to the Catholic Church, we have a body of laws. It's called canon law, because the word canon is actually the Greek word for law. So we're really saying duplicative. But when we say canon law, whether in Latin or in English or Italian, any modern languages, we mean ecclesiastic law of a particular kind. So canons are the fundamental principles of legal right in Christianity. I think even the Orthodox use the term canon, whereas a law might be a particular decree of a Roman pontiff. And in the Catholic Church, we have the Code of Canon Law. The code was first collected, and the laws of the Church were first collected in a code, imitating Napoleon's legal reforms. And in 1917, it's called the Pio-Benedictine Code, because it was published at the request of Pius X, but finished under Benedict the 15th. And in 1983, John Paul II published a revised version, which in many ways has a lot more theoretical considerations in it, except for the fact that, like any code of law, laws function if men observe them. And then for electing a pope, we have the papal law, Universi Dominici Egregis, which is a constitution on the election of a Roman pontiff in a conclave. Now, most of us never even read laws. Maybe you've read a couple bills before the legislature or Congress of your country when there's some controverted point. And the laws of the Catholic Church don't have to do with funding and programs and national budgets, okay? That's not what they're about. They're about how the clergy and the laity should comport themselves and how do they handle disputes and who has the right and duty to do this and that. Because the correlative of every right is a duty. If your right to property, you have a right to property, everyone else has the duty to respect your right to property, and you have the duty to respect other people's rights. So if there's a right, there's a corresponding duty. And in modern times, they must speak about rights, they never speak about duties. Duties are more consonant with the whole concept of a monarchical government or a society that is rightly organized. And it's more important to teach people duties. And if they did, then they would respect rights. Okay, so the problem with human law, however, is human law is written by minds that cannot know all future possibilities, whereas God foresees all things. And men inspired by God foresee all things. And so many scholars will say this code is defective, the new Code of Canon Law in the Catholic Church, because there's many conditions it doesn't. And indeed there has been, and still is, many calls to update or correct or improve that part of canon law which has to do with punishing clergy for doing things they shouldn't be doing, or religious. And we all know that. It's in the news almost constantly about the abuse of children, even abuse of adults by clergy or religious. The other weakness is that the Code of Canon Law is not written by laymen or by religious. It's written by clergy and is published by the Roman Pontiff. This code, it only governs the Roman Church and the Latin Rite. It doesn't govern the other parts of the Catholic Church or different rites. It doesn't govern the Ukrainian Church or the Armenian Church or the Melkite Church or the Maronite Church or the Chaldean Church or the Thomas Christians in India. They have their own laws, even though they are part of the Catholic Church. This is only Roman law. But the election of the Roman Pontiff is a papal law. It's not a canon. And it's written to bind cardinals. It's called Universi Dominici Gregis. It was published the 22nd of February, 1996. The very day it's published already says something, because the 22nd of February every year in the Roman Rite is the feast of the chair of St. Peter, so the apostle. And that John Paul II chose that day to publish that law shows that he's exercising his authority as successor of St. Peter to guarantee the succession in the apostolic see, which means the passing on of authority from St. Peter to each bishop of Rome down through time. And in the Catholic Church, we believe that will happen until the end of time. There's a problem, however, in the papal law, and if you read it, you can find out immediately. So just read paragraph, I think it's 76 of the papal law, or the second to the last paragraph, that's called the penultimate paragraph of the final law. So in paragraph 76, I think it is, it was 72, it says, if this manner of voting is not followed, the election is invalid, and no decree is necessary to declare it. So if we look at this law without discussing any particular conclave, we can understand immediately a necessity. Because if this law actually says when there is a valid election or not, and declares it null and void when the rules aren't followed, what are we going to do to correct that? So is there a tribunal in the church where we can take a lawsuit and say the cardinals didn't follow the law and then sue them? No. Those of us who aren't clergy, and I'm not clergy either, I'm not just a Franciscan hermit, if you have any familiarity with the laws of your modern state in which you live and are a citizen, you know that there's usually a remedy for things like that. Usually some kind of court you could take a dispute to over an election or something of that. But I don't think, for example, and I'm not entirely familiar with the laws of the United States, I don't think there is a law that tells you what to do when an election's invalid. You can go to court and demonstrate it was invalid and try to get the results canceled. But I don't think there's actually a law that says it. Some states might have such regulations. So where is it in church law what you do when an election's invalid? And here's the problem. There's no law. There's no Code of Canon Law. There's nothing in the Code of Canon Law or in the papal law to tell you what you do when the election's valid, even though the papal law says that if you don't do this, it's invalid. So here we have the problem of juridical positivists. The juridical positivists say nothing is legal unless you're following a written law. And this is a very destructive concept, because if you accept juridical positivism, then just think about it. The result is tyranny. So imagine there is an invalid election in your country, and imagine there's no real legal way to declare the election invalid and that the person who's claiming to be the winner is the winner. And imagine the courts won't hear it, or there is no justice. What is the result? The result is tyranny. Someone obtains the claim to power without having the right to make that claim to power. And if you don't have laws in your country or in your church of what to do when an election's invalid, then you're going to encounter all the followers of juridical positivism will say, the person who has used force to seize power is the rightful ruler. And that's the definition of tyranny. And Aristotle says that democracies with constitutions are a wonderful thing, but constitutions written by men can't foresee all futures. And when something happens that it's not foreseen, they usually break down into tyrannies. So this is how dangerous juridical positivism and the Catholic notion and the notion before the 1890s, before positivism took hold and had an influence on jurisprudence, was that you have recourse to the sources of right, also called the sources of law. In English, we should say the sources of law, but it's better to say right, because when people think of law, they think of a written law, okay, because of the influence of juridical positivism. And if you talk to a civil attorney in your country, he will say there's no laws unless they're written down. That's juridical positivism. But in the Catholic Church, we don't think that way, and we've never thought that way officially. There are people who think that way, but they're not thinking according to traditions of the church. So the sources of right, or the sources of law, are whence all the laws in the Catholic Church are supposed to be based on or derive from. So there's divine law, there's evangelical law, there's apostolic law, there is ecclesiastic law, there's papal law. Divine law is something that God has declared, a command or rule he has given. So, for example, the Ten Commandments are of divine law because God is their author. All the commandments God revealed to Moses would be considered of divine law. Any truth that was taught by the prophets of the Old Testament or the apostles of the New or Jesus Christ is considered of divine law if it is coming from God. If it's just the apostles' decision, like St. Paul, if he says it in a letter, that's apostolic law. So the election of the Roman pontiff, you will find, is based on apostolic law because the Church of Rome was established by St. Peter the Apostle. And when he died, he left it to the Church of Rome to choose their own bishop. So you're not going to find it written down in a code of canon law that the Roman Church has the right to elect its own bishop. You won't even find that in here. And what people think the law says ends up, for many people, being the error or opinion they have that distorts their behavior. Because, for example, it says that you can ask most Catholics, and they say, who has the right to elect the Roman pontiff? And they're going to say the cardinals do. And that's wrong. Actually, if we read the Code of Canon Law, Canon 349, it doesn't give them a right. It says they're competent to provide for the election of a Roman pontiff, which isn't a right, it's a duty, okay? It's a ministerial duty. And I just did a video on this in Italian, so this is my English version, and I use this comparison, because Canon 349 says the cardinals of the Holy Roman Church constitute a college. That's a legal entity that's based on membership. That's what the word college means. A peculiar college, it means an individual college, to which it pertains to provide for the election of the Roman pontiff. The Latin says, which is competent to provide for the election of the Roman pontiff. So we don't see the word privilege in there. We don't see the word lay in there. We see no exclusive language in there. And this is because, like parents, the parents have the duty to feed the children of the family. They are the ones most competent to do that. If they don't feed the children in the family, is it a crime in any legal system to feed those children? No, you won't find any legal system in the world that says It's a crime for other people to feed them. And that's because their life depends on eating, and their parents can't deprive them of life. No one can deprive them of life. They have a right to eat. Okay? And therefore, if the parents fail or absent or don't provide food for the children, anyone with food can feed them, and they do not violate the rights of anyone. They don't harm anyone, and it's not illegal. And I would challenge anyone to find a legal system where that would be illegal. And that is the same language. The parents are the ones competent to provide for the food of the children. It's the same language for the cardinals doing an election. So if you understand that in jurisprudence, the choice of words is very important. What they signify and don't signify is the crucial thing. So this is not my opinion. I'm telling you what the words of Canon 349 are. You can go and read it yourself. The English translation the translations in modern terms aren't so accurate as the Latin, but the Latin says, qui competit ut electione Romani pontificis perfidiat ad normam juris particulare. And how are they to provide for the Roman pontiff? According to the norm of the particular law, and that's Universi Dominici Gregis, which I cited some moments before. So let's do a thought experiment, and let's imagine that all the cardinals were gathered together for a conference, and there was a terrorist attack, and all the cardinals were killed, along with the Pope. Who's going to elect the Roman pontiff? Now, the people who are strict juridical positivists, they'll say, that's the end of the papacy, because only cardinals can elect the Pope, and there's no more cardinals. And that's like people saying, those children must starve to death because no one has the right to feed them except the parents. And that's the position of people who are psychotic and sociopaths. Okay, so it is clear that there must be an answer, and how do you answer that? The same thing with the children. How do we answer who can lawfully feed the children when there's no parents around? Okay. The modern law won't tell you that, but if you studied the theory of jurisprudence, the history of the theory of jurisprudence, you'll say, we appeal to natural right, which is a higher law. Nature is a higher law than human laws, than even family law. We appeal to natural right because those children have the right to life. Therefore, they have the right to eat. Therefore, in absence of the parents, anyone can fulfill that duty. This is what I call a ministerial ministry. The parents have a competence to feed the children, but not one that excludes all other actors if they fail. And in the election of the Roman pontiff, we have an analogous case. If the cardinals have all been killed, or let's say the cardinals all become Jehovah's Witnesses, or let's say the cardinals all become Freemasons and no longer believe the Catholic faith. In those cases, we see that they're no longer competent. They don't even have the intention. And the problem with the papal law of John Paul II is that it presupposes that there are cardinals who are competent and Catholic and have the intention to elect a Catholic as Pope and follow the rules. And if they don't, the election's invalid, but it doesn't tell you what they do when the election's valid. So there are many people who say that when the cardinals elect a public heretic like Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost, and I've demonstrated that he's a heretic in several videos. I'll give you some links. And in my article in De Fide Catholica, what does it mean to be a heretic and when is one a heretic? And what does the Code of Canon Law say about that? In my article, Canon Law would make Cardinal Prevost an impossible pope. And Pope Paul IV, foreseeing that by divine inspiration, and St. Pius V, Pope St. Pius V, realizing that Paul IV is inspired, he promulgated the bull Ex Cum Apostolatus Officio that says in a case where the cardinals would elect a heretic, his election is null and void. But the modern code of canon law and the modern papal law doesn't say what you to do. Okay. This means that when there are no cardinals, or they don't do what they do, or they don't follow the laws, we have to have recourse to a higher law. And what is that law? That law is the right of the Roman Church to elect its own bishop. And that's of apostolic institution. All the ecclesiastic authors agree to that. Meaning St. Peter the Apostle, when he was dying, he just said, "You elect my successor." And his successor wasn't St. Paul, even though St. Paul was still alive. It was, I think, Linus, okay? Linus Clement, Sixtus, you hear the original martyr saints in the Roman canon. Now, there are a lot of crazy people out there who have, when I said these things in perhaps a format 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago, they didn't understand what I was saying because they have no training in law and they can't read Latin, although some of them have millions of followers and dictate to the people what they're supposed to believe. This is called Catholic media. It's not Catholic. Before the council, these people would all be excommunicated because laymen weren't allowed to publish anything under the name Catholic. Okay, and they don't know this stuff. They don't understand this stuff. But since they want to hobnob with the people in power, and since they're really not opposed to globalism or Freemasonry, they don't care that tyranny. They don't care if there's tyranny in the church. If the law doesn't say what to do, then the people who are most powerful just dictate what they do, and that's right. That's the new definition of right, whatever they do. And we saw this in the conclave of 2013, and now we've seen this in the conclave of 2025. The cardinals say it, it must be right. It doesn't have to follow the laws, whatever they say. And that's an easy appeal from someone who's ignorant for those who are ignorant. But that's not how the church works. We have laws, we have rights. And the Catholic opinion is if there were no cardinals, or if the papal law invalidates the election, or any existing papal law says the election of this or that person is invalidated, then we must appeal to who has the right to elect the Pope. So if you look at the bull of Nicholas II in Nomine Domini, April 13th, 1059, I think I'm the only person alive who's ever translated that bull. You can find it from Rome. You'll see that for practical reasons, Pope Nicholas II established the cardinals for an easy election, because in the olden days, in the first 7 centuries, all the faithful of the Rome who wanted to participate would come together in a piazza with the clergy and the laity religious and have an election of the Pope. And we know that it was always the majority of individuals. We know sometimes fights broke out. I think in the end of the 4th century, there was even some people killed in street fighting between two different factions. And the Roman families ended up getting involved. And in the Middle Ages, all kinds of scandalous things going on with elections because they didn't really have a law that said what to do. Even once it came to cardinals, we've had like 26 anti-popes, and a good number of them because the College of Cardinals couldn't agree. But the Church of Rome, that is all the faithful of Rome, all the clergy of the Rome, all the religious of Rome, they were the original electorate. So by apostolic law, they have the right to vote. And when the Pope writes a law about papal elections, their right is suspended so long as that law is in force. And when John Paul II published Universi Dominici Gregis, he abolished all previous papal law. But he did not and cannot abolish apostolic law, because the decisions of the apostles are part of apostolic tradition, and that means they're part of the deposit of the faith, and the Pope can't go against them. Even if he tries, he doesn't have that authority. So for those who reject juridical positivism, and those who know just the basics that I've explained in today's video, you'll see that if the cardinals elect a heretic or violate the law and the election's invalid, then it is the entire Church of Rome has the right to elect the Pope. As a matter of fact, this is even more clear if you read the papal law of John Paul II, because the papal law of John Paul II only allows them to do an election within 20 days of the death of a Roman pontiff. If they should repent in 3 more months, 8 more years, you know, it doesn't matter. They can't do an election again then. They don't have the authority then to do an election. The original electorate would have that authority because the papal law forbids them from doing a second election. And this is the thing that if you read the law and think about it, you realize. And that's why Project Save Rome, which is to help Catholics gather together to elect a Catholic Pope, is the only Catholic solution, but it's the one the Masons were totally going to attack. The deep church and the deep state and all the people tied into their systems of control are going to oppose. Because when all the people come together, they can elect a Catholic and break free from the control of the Vatican that has been established by the CIA since the death of Pius XII. And that's what the church needs. We have to get back to the true faith. And I've made this video for people who are rational, who want objective facts and reasonings, and want to make a decision on the basis of that, not the opinion of Catholic influencers who just don't have the formation to understand this, or people who are actually CIA agents, even say so, and or clergy who are part of the corruption that want a corrupt gang of cardinals to run the church, even if they break the rules. And from Rome, you can read the 2 arguments of why that conclave was invalidated for 2 reasons. Not just 1 reason, 2 reasons, according to the laws of the church. And I encourage you to read more about the Project Save Rome. I'll put a link in this video, and the notes of this video on YouTube and on the page at From Rome, so you can do that. Okay. God bless. Ave Maria.